The Drenvok were a species spoken of in hushed tones even among the most seasoned galactic explorers. Massive, clawed quadrupeds with piercing bioluminescent eyes and hide as tough as hull steel, they reigned supreme over the forests of Tyvora. Not merely predators, they were apex guardians of their lands, particularly when it came to their young. Few dared to encroach upon their nesting grounds, and those who did rarely returned. They weren't mindless beasts. They were intelligent, social, and fiercely territorial. Every species in the Alliance knew better than to interfere. But then came the humans. Humanity's integration into the Galactic Alliance was met with curiosity and skepticism. Their reputation for boldness, unpredictability, and an unnerving resilience was already spreading, but Tyvora became the proving ground. Where other species avoided the Drenvok heartlands, humans applied for clearance to study the region. Not one but dozens. Biologists, field medics, conservation volunteers, all requesting deployment into known Drenvok-controlled zones. The response from the Alliance's Xenobiology Council was confusion. Why humans? Why risk it? The Drenvok weren't friendly, and they weren't diplomatic. They didn't send emissaries or participate in summit calls. Their only form of communication was dominance and deference. And they certainly didn't tolerate other species near their cubs. Any intrusion, even from allied fauna researchers, was met with immediate aggression. One Arvani scout craft was found shredded across kilometers of forest. Warnings were issued. Zones marked off limits. Still, the humans persisted. They didn't come with weapons. They didn't fly drones or scan aggressively. They walked, camped, and observed. One by one, they disappeared into the forest for weeks at a time and re-emerged unscathed. No injuries. No stories of threats. They spoke little about their encounters, which only fed the rumors. Some claimed the Drenvok tolerated them out of curiosity. Others whispered that humans emitted a scent the Drenvok found calming. One theory, more myth than science, suggested that the Drenvok viewed humans not as rivals, but as some form of lost kin. No proof, of course. But something had changed. Reports began surfacing, small things at first. A human botanist named Teed reported being shadowed for 2 days by a Drenvok juvenile. It never attacked, only followed at a distance. Another researcher awoke to find a freshly killed deer-like creature laid outside his tent, positioned neatly, as if offered. Most striking was a transmission leak from the emergency channel. A human nurse treating an injured scout near the perimeter claimed a Drenvok adult had approached and silently dropped medicinal leaves known to reduce infection. No aggression. No growls. Just presence. No other species in the Alliance received this treatment. The Turil diplomats were snarled at. The Jiraxi medical drones were destroyed on sight. Even stealth probes were tracked and hunted. But the humans were simply watched. Trusted. No one could explain it. And yet humans didn't celebrate. They didn't flaunt the difference. If anything, they downplayed it, stating only that they moved with respect and acted with caution. It wasn't humility. It was a quiet understanding. Something fundamental was happening, and they didn't want to disrupt it with analysis or attention. They kept no aggressive postures, made no assumptions of dominance. They walked with open hands, speaking in low tones when passing through dens. No other race treated the Drenvok not as beasts or research material, but as equals. The humans didn't see predators. They saw guardians. Alien analysts remained baffled. They scanned for toxins, frequencies, even subconscious psychic imprints. Nothing. The interactions defied logic. The humans weren't special physically. They lacked claws, speed, and biological defenses. But they didn't act like prey. Nor did they act like predators. They acted like something else, something older. Within human circles, theories surfaced. Perhaps it was Earth's own past. Millennia of coexisting with wolves, bears, and lions. Maybe something deep in their evolutionary memory resonated with the Drenvok. A shared respect between ancient apex hunters. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the way humans approached the cubs, not with fear or entitlement, but with the calm of someone who had held fragile life in their arms before. No records of threats. No retaliation. The Drenvok made no gestures of alliance, but made their intentions clear in the silence of the jungle. When a human walked through their territory, they did not hide their cubs. They let them see. Let them smell. Let them learn. The message was unspoken but undeniable. The Drenvok, feared across systems, had judged humanity not by its technology or its power, but by its posture in the presence of the vulnerable. And somehow, by standards no one else understood, humanity had passed. Avery Lang didn't come to Tyvora seeking history. She came for data, cellular compositions, environmental interactions, predator-prey ratios. She was a xenobiologist trained to record, not rewrite interspecies relations. But everything changed on the 32nd day of her assignment. She had ventured farther than usual, alone, logging fungal growth near a ravine, when a noise stopped her. Not the sharp warning growl of an adult, but the whimpering cry of something young, hurt, and afraid. She moved slowly, instinct overriding procedure. A Drenvok cub lay curled near a root tangle, flank gashed and leg bent unnaturally. No adults in sight. Its breathing was shallow, wet. It should have attacked her. Or screamed. But instead, it stared up, unmoving. A challenge in its eyes, but the pain overrode its instinct. Avery didn't retreat. She knelt, whispering softly, not to soothe but to be heard, measured, constant. Her fingers moved methodically. Medical kit opened. She didn't touch the cub right away. She let it see her prep the tools, let it feel the slow rhythm of her presence. No sudden movements. Just purpose. She cleaned the wound, applied antiseptic, and splinted the leg. It snarled once, a low warning that never escalated. She offered water through a drip line, and to her surprise the cub drank. Blood soaked the ground. Time passed. Shadows shifted. She knew adult Drenvok were watching. She didn't need to see them. The pressure was unmistakable, ancient, weighty, dangerous. Still, no charge came. No teeth. No thunder of paws. Just silence. And waiting. When she was done, she didn't linger. She backed away slowly, never turning her back, hands visible. She left the cub wrapped in thermal foil and marked the area in universal hazard colors, not as a threat, but as protection, signaling others to keep distance. She didn't tell command. Not fully. Only that she had encountered signs of young fauna and had made minimal contact. It wasn't a lie. Just not the part that mattered. The next morning, the cub was gone. No blood trail, no signs of predation. But something else waited outside her outpost, a kill. Fresh, clean, deliberately laid. Not dumped. Placed. Not a threat. A message. She waited a week before another appeared. Always before sunrise. Different meat, different presentation. Sometimes placed beside river stones. Sometimes near campfire embers. Each time, the gifts became more precise. Stripped of fur. Sinew trimmed. They weren't feeding her. They were communicating. It wasn't long before others started noticing similar behavior. A logistics officer mentioned strange tracks around his camp, small, juvenile. He assumed scouts. But no supplies were missing. A communications tech spotted glowing eyes from the tree lean, unmoving, watching as he repaired a signal tower. No threat display. Just quiet presence. Avery realized it wasn't just that they spared her. They had seen something. Not in her biology, but in her decision. She hadn't run. Hadn't flinched. Hadn't claimed dominance or cowered. She had acted. Purposefully. Gently. Without negotiation. In Drenvok terms, perhaps, that made her something worthy. Avery began documenting the responses, indirectly, anonymously. Behavioral shifts. Patterns. Not hard science. But enough to suggest the event wasn't isolated. The cub had survived. That was the only explanation that fit the gifts. She hadn't rescued a creature. She had treated a life. That distinction mattered. Weeks later, during a minor storm, a new sign appeared. A set of cub prints, larger now, circled her camp and vanished into the underbrush. No adult tracks. No mess. Just a single tuft of pale fur left at her threshold. She preserved it without analysis. She didn't need proof. She already understood what it meant. There was no ceremony, no treaty signed. But the shift was undeniable. The forest changed. The air, once heavy with unseen danger, now felt inhabited rather than hostile. The Drenvach had made a decision, not with words but with allowance. Avery had never spoken to them. Never asked for their approval. She had offered care without expecting outcome, and they had seen enough. She hadn't earned trust through power or manipulation, but by choosing not to flinch when life lay broken at her feet. Others kept asking why the Drenvach seemed different with humans. What scent they emitted? What neural patterns they shared? Avery said nothing. She just recorded her notes and submitted her reports. She knew they were asking the wrong questions. The answer wasn't chemical or genetic. It was a matter of who knelt first. Within a year of Avery Lang's unspoken encounter, patterns emerged across other colonies stationed near Drenvach territory. Incidents once dismissed as anomalies began to pile up, each one featuring a human, a cub, and a quiet, inexplicable moment of allowance. Reports from Tyvora's outposts described close proximity sightings, but no threats issued. Drenvach adults allowed humans within meters of resting dens, sometimes during feeding. The same tolerance did not extend to any other species. A technician assigned to maintain environmental sensors recalled a Drenvach juvenile observing him from behind a thicket. He moved cautiously, fully aware of the consequences of misinterpretation. But instead of disappearing into the underbrush, the cub remained, ears forward, posture low, not fearful, not aggressive. It mirrored his position. Minutes passed. The tech resumed work. The cub simply watched. Weeks later, a medical crew dispatched to stabilize a heat-exhausted human explorer found a young Drenvach already standing guard. The adult that must have brought it was unseen but surely nearby. When the medics approached, the cub backed off, deliberate, controlled, no panic. Once the man was stabilized and evacuated, they reviewed the camp logs. Motion-triggered footage showed the Drenvach nudging the unconscious human toward shade, then lying beside him until others arrived. Another team reported something even more direct. A mother Drenvach approached the perimeter of their base under full daylight. Her cub limped visibly. The mother made no aggressive moves. She simply placed the cub on the edge of the clearing, backed away, and vanished into the tree-line. No verbal exchange. No challenge posture. She left the cub in their care. The gesture was undeniable. Medics worked swiftly. Fractured foreleg. Infection risk. Standard treatment applied? The cub responded well. No sedatives were used. It didn't resist. 3 days later, the mother returned. She made no sound. The cub walked to her, cast one final glance back, and disappeared with her into the wild. No attack followed. No warnings issued. It wasn't isolated. The same behavior repeated across 6 zones, different packs, different cubs. Always with humans. Never with machines. Never with other species. Even skeptical Alliance observers began to question their assumptions. Surveillance drones, when deployed near cub sightings, were instantly targeted. Not just chased, destroyed. Metal ripped open, memory cores crushed. But when a human approached, the Drenvach would remain still or shift silently away, clearing a path. In one remarkable case, a Drenvach cub wandered into a human outpost and began inspecting cooking gear. 2 children spotted it first, and instead of fleeing or panicking, remained calm. Their parents approached slowly. The cub didn't retreat. It sniffed at a pot, nosed a thermal blanket, then lay down by the fire pit. 20 minutes later, an adult Drenvach emerged from the shadows. No aggression. No threat. Just observation. After retrieving the cub, it paused before leaving, as if confirming the safety of the humans involved. The entire encounter lasted less than an hour. It was logged, time-stamped, and reviewed frame by frame. No errors. No misreadings. Trust had been extended deliberately. The Alien Research Board struggled to define it. They used terms like non-hostile behavioral anomaly or selective tolerance, but those words failed to capture the scale of what was unfolding. These weren't isolated events. They marked a shift in instinctual behavior, a re-evaluation of what humanity represented in the eyes of a species no one had ever successfully studied up close. Attempts by non-human researchers to replicate these moments failed immediately. Drenvach responses reverted to classic territorial defense, bluff charges, vocalizations, posturing. Even when mimicking human posture or using scent masking gear, the results did not change. It wasn't appearance or sound. It was something else. Over time, Drenvach began making brief appearances near human habitations. Sometimes only one at a distance. Other times, full packs lingering just beyond the outer lights at night. They didn't interfere. They simply existed in parallel. The boundaries blurred. What had once been hard borders became shared spaces. No one declared peace. No ceremony formalized the change. But on Tyvora, every human who stepped into the forest knew something had shifted. A line had been crossed, not through dominance or concession, but by recognition. The Drenvach had made a decision about humans, not based on technology, force, or negotiation, but based on presence, action, and something deeper, something felt. The most telling sign came not from reports or footage, but from a single act. A Drenvach mother, in full view of 6 scientists, placed her cub into the arms of a human adolescent. Not dropped. Placed. The cub did not resist. The human held still. Breath shallow. The moment passed in silence. No one spoke. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't accidental. It was a statement, delivered without a single word. By the time formal Alliance field analysts arrived to investigate the mounting reports, the humans on Tyvora already understood what data could never capture. The relationship between the Drenvach and humanity was not transactional or conditional. It was instinctual, forged in unspoken exchanges no chart could represent. Attempts to recreate the connection under controlled conditions failed entirely. When alien researchers tried placing injured animals in proximity to Drenvach dens or replicating neutral posture, they were either ignored or met with warning growls. The Drenvach weren't responding to behaviors, they were responding to presence, intent, and something rooted too deep for protocols to reach. Despite requests, no human ever offered a guide on how to interact with the Drenvach. Not because they refused, but because they didn't know how to translate the understanding. Each encounter was unique. A subtle shift in posture, a slowed breath, a refusal to escalate. These weren't strategies. They were instinctual decisions, grounded in respect rather than curiosity or caution. Humans didn't insert themselves into Drenvach dynamics. They simply moved around them, with a rhythm the Drenvach seemed to accept. One clear trend emerged. Drenvach would not engage with humans who sought them directly. If approached with force, precision, or assumed knowledge, they would vanish. But if a human acted in the presence of the Drenvach as they would in any other place, deliberate, calm, observant, the Drenvach would remain. Not tame. Not friendly. But present. A supply carrier crash near the southern expanse put this into sharp relief. 2 humans survived, one injured, the other concussed. No distress beacons could reach the orbital net due to interference from dense mineral deposits. For 3 days they remained stranded, exposed and immobile. On the second night, the survivor saw a figure on the ridge. Massive, still, and unmistakable. A Drenvach adult. It didn't approach. It didn't disappear. It simply stood, watching. Hours later, smaller shapes moved through the darkness. Cubs. They didn't come near the wreckage but circled at a distance. No sound. No growls. Just awareness. When the rescue team arrived, they found signs around the camp. Claw marks that formed no threat pattern, trampled brush that showed careful passing. As if the Drenvach had patrolled the perimeter during the humans' most vulnerable hours. The lead rescuers said the impression wasn't of surveillance. It felt like protection. Stories like this became more frequent. Drenvach not intervening, but appearing during moments of human hardship. A mechanic caught under a fallen drone found his signal booster crushed but his bleeding leg wrapped in a leaf with antiseptic properties. A student lost during a nighttime trail was found asleep beside a warm rock formation, one recently vacated by a Drenvach, based on heat residue. In every case, the humans had not called for help. Yet the Drenvach had come. The Alliance tried to categorize it as conditional cohabitation. Their model was flawed. This wasn't cohabitation. It was a re-evaluation of status. The Drenvach no longer saw humans as foreign elements or invasive observers. They had placed them within a different category entirely, either prey nor threat, but something adjacent to kin. The clearest evidence came in the form of behavior unseen with any other species. When Drenvach cubs were left unattended, sometimes for extended periods, they often wandered toward human outposts. Not in confusion, but with intent. They explored tools, sniffed clothing, sometimes lay in the sun beside data terminals. When a cub was injured, limping, lethargic, its sides swollen with infection, it collapsed outside the camp of an agricultural technician. No noise. Just presence. The humans treated it. Not because it was allowed, but because it was natural to do so. The adult Drenvach never appeared. They didn't need to. Even when fully grown, the cubs that had encountered humans in their youth remained unusually tolerant. One was spotted circling a human excavation site, visibly larger, unscarred, and confident. It did not approach but remained in visible range for several hours. No aggression. No fear. Just acknowledgement. Nothing about this change was orchestrated. No treaty was signed. No contact established. Yet the forests of Tyvora were no longer marked as danger zones for human researchers. Patrols were still cautious, but the need for armed escort vanished. The Drenvach didn't grant territory, they granted trust. Not through hierarchy, but recognition. A rare, profound judgment of a species that didn't try to dominate the wild or tame it, but lived within its rhythm. No species had ever received that. Not once. Only the humans. And they never asked for it. The full realization of the bond came quietly, not with ceremony, but through undeniable pattern. Across Tyvora, humans became the only species the Drenvach permitted near their young without provocation or warning. Entire generations of cubs grew up with the distant scent of humans in their earliest memories, not as invaders or unpredictable anomalies, but as silent presences who never pushed, never preyed, and always acted with deliberate care when it mattered most. This shaped something deep within their development. Researchers observed that cubs raised near human zones displayed behavioral variations. They exhibited curiosity, approached tools left near the edges of forests, and even mirrored certain human postures during moments of pause. More strikingly, none displayed territorial aggression toward humans, even those carrying equipment or making noise. There was no training, no domestication. Just a mutual understanding forged through years of consistent action. This dynamic spread beyond wilderness zones. In isolated settlements, where human engineers or medics lived alone or in small groups, Drenvach began leaving tokens, clumps of wild herbs, smooth stones arranged in deliberate patterns, animal bones stripped of flesh and laid out beside campfires. Not warnings. Not tests. Just marks of observation and, perhaps, of recognition. In one recorded incident, a human child wandered too far from her family's boundary sensors and tripped into a small ravine. Her cry drew no immediate response from nearby equipment. But minutes later, a Drenvach adolescent, barely more than a cub itself, descended from the ridge and stood watch beside her. It didn't touch. Didn't interfere. It waited. When her father arrived in a panic, it gave one glance and retreated. No hostility. No need for confrontation. It had stayed simply because she was small, hurt, and alone. That moment sparked the final wave of analysis. Data scientists, xenopsychologists, biobehaviorists, they all tried to frame the phenomenon. None succeeded in full. What they could prove was this: no human had ever attacked a Drenvok cub. Not in error, not in panic, not even in self-defense. The humans had shown restraint even when injured, had administered aid even when alone, and had never treated a cub as a threat. That record was clean. Impossibly so. And the Drenvok, despite having no language compatible with human speech, had remembered. Through this trust, entirely new opportunities emerged. Field scientists were able to study forest ecology more deeply, move through high-risk terrain without escort, and observe natural Drenvok behaviors at a range never before imagined. None of this was done through negotiation. It was simply allowed. As if the Drenvok had concluded that humans did not require containment or exclusion. They didn't need to be tested anymore. They had already passed. One of the final acts that sealed this understanding came from the Drenvok themselves. A human biologist, aging and terminally ill, chose to remain on Tyvora for his final months. He had spent decades quietly tracking wildlife migration patterns, never once attempting contact. His records were precise, his steps careful. He spoke often about the Drenvok, not with awe, but with calm respect. As his strength failed, he moved his cot near the open ridge facing the woods. On the last morning of his life, footage captured 3 adult Drenvok standing within 10 meters of his camp. Not circling. Not threatening. Just still. One stepped forward and placed a smooth, flat stone on the edge of his fire pit. Then they left. The stone bore no markings, but those who studied the Drenvok long enough understood the weight of such an offering. Not a tool. Not a weapon. Just a symbol. Something left behind in memory of one who had never intruded, never demanded, but had always observed with quiet care. Since then, human children born on Tyvora are taught early what to do if they see a cub: remain calm, give space, observe. They aren't told to seek trust or approach. They're taught to simply exist near the wild without disturbing it. And it works. The bond endures. No treaty was ever signed. No council ratified this alliance. But the message was clear across the wilderness. Predators that once devoured any outsider now chose humans to watch over their most vulnerable. Not as tools, not as pets, and not as equals, but as something far rarer. As creatures they could trust.